Hello guys, in this video I'm going to build this snowy base for this Sd.Kfz 7.1 which I built a while ago. As you can see in the previous video I more or less finished the vehicle with it just missing some dirt and weather effects and with a small problem with those old rubber band style tracks from Tamiya. My first job was to select an appropriate size base. Originally I was going to have quite a big base here with a ruined building in the background, but in the end I decided that just a sort of muddy, snowy terrain backdrop would be enough. So I went for this wooden frame. As you can see, we do have gaps in the rubber band tracks because I couldn't get them to stick. However, part of the job of the terrain will be to stick those into the ground and hold them in place. The main products I'm using for this are from Vallejo. We've got this thick mud, which is Russian mud, and this thick mud, black mud. These are very similar to the AK ground textures which I often use. Although I'd say perhaps one difference is the Vallejo mud tends to have a bit of a higher water content. So you'll see as I make the base here, I use quite a lot more of this material on the base than I probably would have done for the equivalent AK texture. With hindsight, it might have been wiser here to use sculptor mould or clay or something similar to build up the variation in the terrain surface and then add the mud to the top. And certainly I think that would have helped me save on the paste as well. Once I had the base covered, the next job was to put a bit more on and to try to get a sort of general semblance of vehicle tracks going in a certain direction across the base. Then, because the vehicle is basically finished and because I need to get those tracks pinned into position with the terrain mud, I took the vehicle, squeezed the tracks as close up as I could and set it into the terrain. Of course, with a big wet muddy field like this, we need to make sure the vehicle is properly sunk in rather than floating on the top. So then I took some of the black mud, which I kind of imagined to be the more recently churned up mud, and I added that in a few select areas, mainly just trying to push the mud up towards the tracks and making them look like they were sunk into the ground. With hindsight, I probably should have let the initial layer dry before I did this. Once that was done, I left everything overnight to dry, and once it had, a couple of things happened. The first is that the paste seems to dry and propel the track sort of upwards, or maybe it's just that the paste shrunk. So the vehicle is once again floating on top of the mud there. The other issue is that it must have a very high water content because look at the warpage on that base. It's a huge curve there. That's not such a big deal. To be honest, you can't really tell by looking at the long edge. But I do think that the AK paste with its lower water content probably wouldn't have caused that. Anyway, that meant I needed to add another layer of mud to blend those tracks in again. And to a certain extent that was an advantage because I wanted to put these leaves in the ground and I forgot to do it on the first pass. So the process was the same: take some of the black mud, mix the leaves in, and blend it up to the edge of the tracks. I also took this opportunity to start putting mud on the wheels and the top parts of the tracks. Just quite roughly here, but this can be blended still with water before it dries. Next up I wanted to add some snow and ice. The goal was to have some snow on the ground, but either something that looks like a first covering of snow or the last remnants of snow, rather than an entirely snow-covered terrain base. This is Krycell Ice and Snow Wash from Precision Ice and Snow. It's something I bought a long time ago. I used a couple of times, I think most recently in 2019 when I built this SMK diorama. and then somehow it sort of got lost on my shelf. So after a very good shake, it was ready to use. It's sort of a very thin wash which goes on clear and then does dry with a bit of a sort of white, sort of icy sheen to it. Because I wanted a slightly thicker look than it provides on its own, I also use this Krycell Extra snow. Essentially this is just a white powder. One of the difficulties I had with this in the past was making it stick, so I decided to mix this into the ice and snow wash to make a kind of paste. And then I applied it to the diorama. At this point the second layer of the black mud is still wet, as you can see from the glossy texture. My philosophy here was very much put it on in small amounts. You can always add more later, but it's much harder to remove it. This initial mix was a bit thin, so I added some more snow powder. I also made sure that I put some in key areas on the vehicle. So like these small nooks and crannies here which will probably collect blowing snow. Once I was happy with that, I left it to dry overnight. Annoyingly, this looks quite decent in the video. It does look a bit like snow that's melting around the edges, the last remnants of some snow. But in real life it didn't quite have the effect that I wanted. In particular, it was a little bit flat, both in terms of gloss matte finish and in terms of the volume of the snow itself. To try to solve both of those problems, I took some of this wet effect enamel from AK, mixed in quite a large amount of the snow powder, and put a second layer of snow in many areas. And I think straight away that looked quite a lot better. Not least of which, because this mix flows a bit better, it has a much more natural snow-like finish to it, because of course snow tends to have a smooth surface. A side effect of that was that I ended up with a bit more snow than I necessarily wanted originally, but I think it was okay. Here you can see I built up those snowbanks quite a lot, and now I'm using a thinner mixture with less powder to blend the edges into the road. I'm trying to go for that sort of frozen hard ground effect. I also use that thinner mixture on key areas of the vehicle, because of course being metal it would likely have some ice build-up on it. Next up it was time to prepare a few accessories. So here I have some 3D printed jerry cans, painted in field green and German grey, chips using aluminium paint with the sponge technique, and various accessories that came with the Tamiya kit. You can see here now the groundwork doesn't actually look as good on the camera as it does in real life, but it does look better now than it originally did. Some of that same very thin ice wash was used on the accessories. Next up was the crew. Tamiya give us this crew of 5. They're typical older Tamiya figures, but they still work decently well. White, of course, is quite a difficult colour to paint for a uniform. I started by painting the figures clean, so field grey or white trousers and white tunics, then taking that back to dirty things up. I really wanted to make these uniforms muddy. Maybe I went a bit too far in the end, but I did this using some industrial earth oil paint from Abteilung 502, thinned with odorless thinner, and I basically went all in. I absolutely covered the figures with that. It ran quite nicely into the details. And then I used a combination of cotton buds and a brush dipped in some more odourless thinner to remove the excess. I think the uniforms do look quite dirty now. Maybe it's a bit over the top, but then again, it's a muddy environment, they're white uniforms, so I'm fairly happy with that. The last thing to do is take some of the Vallejo black mud, which I used earlier, thin it down with some water, and apply it to the rear deck. I used the same watered down mixture to make some splatter on the wheels, which I probably should have done earlier. And with that, my model was complete. So there we go guys, that was a quick snowy muddy terrain base for my Sd.Kfz 7.1 Flak gun. A great little kit from Tamiya which I enhanced with that Eduard photo etch in my build video. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, feel free to give it a thumbs up or a comment below. I would like to say thank you to my Patreon supporters and YouTube members for their ongoing support. It's massively appreciated. Thank you very much guys. And of course thank you to all of you for watching, commenting, liking and subscribing. Hopefully a slightly quieter time of the year is just around the corner, so some more videos will be upcoming soon. If you're a regular viewer, you'll know that I made some recent videos which all need finishing off, including the Mini Art Omnibus Ambulance, the Ardennes diorama with the Panther and the Stug, and a few others. But they are coming guys, so please do stay tuned. And until they do, thank you very much for watching and have fun modelling.